G'day guys, welcome back to True Eagle for a review of yet another belting. We lose to the Giants by 80 odd points on Sunday morning / afternoon. And again, not really a result that was surprising, albeit it is always tough to see your team get so relentlessly bashed. One thing I will say though is, and I'm interested to know if other people shared this view, but I think that I thought there were more positives out of our loss to GWS than the previous week against the Derby. I certainly felt less depressed afterward. I thought there were more positive signs, and there was a period of the game, a couple of periods rather, where we actually started to play kind of well, dare I say it, or at least really start to do well in certain areas. And, perhaps the fact that it was the youngsters driving that improvement is also reason to feel a little bit better about the result. But I was trying to work out, why did I not feel as depressed about this result? Because I'm trying to audit, is it rational? Well, first of all, I would say that the most obvious thing about last week was that it was the Derby, and losing to Fremantle is always just a little bit worse than any other loss. Secondly, I think the fact that perhaps the game started so poorly and ended better, or at least, got a lot better before the last 5 minutes where they piled on the goals again. Maybe that impacted, my enjoyment of the game. The game was already done. I honestly thought, and I'm not exaggerating here, I honestly thought when the score got to 60-7 early in the second term that 200 was on. I really thought it was shaping up to be like that dreaded game, also in Sydney, funnily enough, in 2023. So the fact that it started so poorly and got better, maybe that was a reason by the end of it I didn't feel as flat about it. I also do think that perhaps home games are harder to sit through when they're terrible, and that's whether you're watching it at home or not. I think you can really feel when there's a home crowd that's depressed watching the game, and so perhaps the fact that, we heard at least a crowd cheering what GWS were doing, maybe subconsciously, it was a little less depressing than the previous week. But let me know your thoughts before we get into how the game actually went. I didn't feel too terrible about it, but let's get into why. So the start of the game, it's pretty bad. GWS pepper the goals, honestly left some goals on the table. It appeared to be a swirling breeze. They were missing a few shots. And I remember thinking, geez, we're lucky they're not kicking a lot of these opportunities. They were all over us. And then there was a period to start the second term where they piled on quite a few goals. And like I said, really thought that they were on world record pace, and I have been burned before. I think when you've seen your team concede 200 in a game not that long ago, your brain automatically prepares you for that possibility. So that's exactly where I was at that point. Towards the second half of that second quarter, things got a little better. We were down by 51 at halftime. So we actually outscored them by a couple of points from that point where it was 60-7. In the third term, though, this is where the game, I would say, definitely got a lot better. It was a really interesting game from a stats profile. So we actually, at one point in the third quarter, were leading the inside 50s and the clearances, and we can't have been far behind in contested ball either. So that is actually something to take from this game. GWS aren't a really strong clearance side, funnily enough, even though their midfield is strong. It's not so much where they torch teams. It's not the clearance part of the game. But given that has been such a problem for our side for a number of years now, and I said as recently as last week, I think we kind of just have to prepare for the fact that we're just going to get butchered in inside 50s and clearances most weeks. The fact that we actually improved on those numbers is encouraging, and we'll get into who actually played in the midfield as well. But we had 20 inside 50s in the third quarter. That is enormous. That is insane. If you do that 4 quarters, you get 80 inside 50s. I'm not even sure Sydney had 80 inside 50s against us when they scored 200, right? So we had a ridiculous amount of repeat entries in that third quarter. The problem with it was we only yielded 3 goals, and I doubt we even won that quarter. I'm sure we didn't. So that was the problem. But the fact is we were actually turning over the ball at half forward quite effectively and in a repeated sense. I suppose it's part of why the inside 50s in that third quarter probably ballooned so much, was it felt like we were intercepting the ball, driving it inside 50, a little bit aimlessly, to be honest. A few blind hacks to areas that should be dangerous, but we didn't really have a presence, or GWS were better organised or whatever. And it's probably a personnel thing as much as anything. We'd turn the ball over and GWS would get it back out, and then we'd go back inside 50 again. So maybe that inflated the numbers as well. But nonetheless, I definitely saw an improvement in that third quarter, and the fact that it was some of our young players really driving that. In fact, just about all of them really, driving that improved number. So that is, for me, the part of the game where I relaxed and was actually encouraged by it. Wasn't as good as the Brisbane performance, but we saw signs of the way we want to play, turning the ball over repeatedly. I think the fact of the matter is GWS are just such a difficult side to defend on transition, and this is another weakness of ours. I talked about our midfield weakness. We also suck at defending in transition as well, and we press up and play quite deep, when we've got possession, trying to force turnovers, and naturally, occasionally, more than occasionally, but certainly even when we were playing well in this game, GWS got goals out the back, and there were moments where we nearly kicked a goal. I think of one where Allen, I thought he marked it. I'm not sure if he actually did. It wasn't paid a mark, and they just went and kicked a goal. So we're a little bit unlucky with moments like that. Overall, though, I'm not going to pretend there wasn't an enormous gap between these two sides. The way GWS moved the ball from one end to the other, it was unreal. We did make it extremely easy for them. The uncontested ball stat, we were down by like 118, I think, which is not new, but it is pretty extreme, 118. But we do regularly go down in that stat. So GWS were able to play their brand really well. They are the best ball movement side in the competition. Darcy Jones had a field day, and the way their runners, are good with the footy in terms of hitting targets, running hard for each other. By contrast, we certainly weren't that in this game. I did hear some interesting commentary on it as well. Somebody said on the broadcast that one thing that kind of happens when your team is renowned for skill errors, which we absolutely are, and that was prevalent again in this game. But one thing that happens is subconsciously teammates stop running as hard to receive because they have a lack of faith that they're actually going to receive the ball and it will expose their own teammates. So that could be a factor here, whether it's effort, I'm not sure. But yeah, this is a weird game where we got on good old-fashioned butchering, no doubt about it. But we did have periods of play where we actually had the game on our terms. Sure, some of that would be down to the fact that the game was already lost. It's not as though we did it in the first half when the game was there to be won. I acknowledge that, but definitely some good signs. So let's talk about some individuals from this game, because there was a few bright sparks there as well. Again, weird to say that about an 80-point loss, but I wasn't as positive about some individuals, 7 days ago when we did the Fremantle review. Tom Gross is the first one that comes to mind. So I want to talk about Tom Gross aligned with Tim Kelly, because I'm very much at the point of thinking that we can't be serious if we pick Tim Kelly next week. Up until this point, I think I have been somewhat clear on my view on Tim Kelly. I think he's been on borrowed time for a little bit. I have defended him broadly, so let me just clarify my position exactly on Tim Kelly. I think the idea that, the trade for him for a start was the reason we're here. It's not. It's part of it, but it's not the entire reason. I think history gets rewritten a little bit to suggest that Tim Kelly has not been good at all for the time he was at West Coast. I think you get a little bit of that rhetoric going at the moment, and some really harsh stuff written. But I think, in 2023, he won our best and fairest, and I genuinely believe he deserved that best and fairest. And I remember at times thinking I was, grateful and I was admiring of how hard he was working. His skill radar was off. He was missing targets, couldn't hit the side of a barn, but he was really trying to lift this side in 2023. Last year, we saw a genuine decline. I don't think Kelly was anywhere near as good as he was the previous year, which doesn't make sense because he had more support in 2024. In 2025, there is no redeeming the performances he's put out. And I think what demonstrates how far off the pace he is at the moment is the fact that Tom Gross comes in as an 18-year-old debutant and just beats him in every single stat. He had more possessions. He was equal first for clearances for West Coast. I think he had the most score involvements with 7 of any West Coast player. He actually attended less centre bounces than Tim Kelly as well. And I think he laid more tackles as well. Whether or not he did, I'm not sure. But in any case, it really undermines this idea we've had of preserving. I would just say that I feel like we have sheltered some of our young midfielders a little bit too much. Clay Hall is an example. Particularly this year, the fact that he was the first one out of the Brisbane game when Jack Graham returned to the side he was a little bit hard done by there. But, from 2 games performance there, when you look at how much contested ball Clay is winning, and I mean, it's probably about 2/3 of the possessions he wins, it's almost impossible to make the case that Tim Kelly's playing better and gives us a better chance of winning. He was okay in the Brisbane game, for sure. Again, radar was off, but 1 passable performance in 4 for a senior player is, to me, no longer acceptable, and we have to drop Tim Kelly this week. And it could be the last game of his career, but he's out of contract at the end of the year. And with all due respect to him, I think there's a chance if he gets dropped here, he does not find his way back into the side. Maybe I'm going a little bit far with that, and there's a chance he goes back to the waffle. I'm not even convinced he'll get dropped this week, but I'm just saying there needs to be a genuine reaction to his lack of form at the moment, because, if you get outperformed by an 18-year-old playing his first game and he looks really good, I think there is no longer a case to be made for Tim Kelly needing to be in this side. Again, I won't disrespect the entire 5 years here. I think he's been in an unfortunate position of having so much attention because he was the product of a trade, and West Coast traded a lot for him, and that's not really his fault. And I think up until the last couple of years, he's been decent in a side that has been falling apart. But now it is no longer justifiable for him to just stay in the side regardless of performance, because it's getting too far. So yeah, a massive tick for Tom Gross on his first performance. Definitely someone I really hope does not lose his spot going into next week. And so far, so good from McQualter from a selection point of view, in my opinion. I suppose that does kind of tie into the next discussion point, which was Sandy Brock playing on Jesse Hogan in isolation. Only picked the one key defender in this game. Now, I haven't seen too much criticism of Sandy Brock, which is nice, because I don't think he deserves it. I think it was the sort of game where Hogan could lead confidently to the ball being delivered on an absolute platter for him. And yes, he had a good day. He did kick accurately. I'll give him that. But he was given a lot of silver service, and I'm sure that Jesse privately would have just acknowledged that was the way it happened in this particular game. It wasn't necessarily a dominant performance. He was kicking well, but, considering he's playing on first game as Sandy Brock, and he will probably never have delivery like that inside 50 for the rest of the season, I'm not too concerned about the fact that he kicked 9 goals. And I saw an analysis on Big Footy. Somebody saw that only 4 of those were actually on Sandy Brock. Thought he played well, relatively speaking, or in the context of this game. 9 intercept possessions as well, which I think was the most of any Eagle. So, definitely keep him in the side. Although, side note, if Mackay and Kerno are playing next week, surely we don't just pick one key position defender. So that's how it ties back into McQualter's selection. It was a brave call to pick just the one. Would Harry Edwards have done that much better, considering Hogan was getting his marks out on the lead quite a lot? Probably not. But I don't know if we'll stay with just the one key defender next game. It may be that Oscar Allen has to go back. It's something I talked about last week, and I think it kind of makes sense if Waterman is available for this game. I'd be interested to know if other people observe what I observed about Jack Williams. For not the first time, I felt that when he went into the ruck in that third quarter, he was having an impact to a greater extent than I think Bailey Williams was. I don't think Bailey had a bad day. I think he lost the hit-outs, but honestly, if we just lose the hit-outs by a bit, given the quality of what we have, that's not a bad result, really. But Jack Williams was actually winning clearances, surging the ball forward, kicked a couple of goals as well, and it really just begs the question why he wasn't in the team. If I may actually make an observation, I did think that Jack didn't look quite as ripped as he did last year. And I've heard someone say on Big Footy that his conditioning might have been why he was left out of the team. I'm not really sure, but the talent is still there. And I absolutely hope he does not make way if Jake Waterman is available against Carlton. Archer Reid was another positive, stringing together a bunch of good performances in a row. His ability to take a couple of contested marks, given how skinny he is as a 19-year-old and impact around the ground, I thought, we've definitely got a decent player there for sure. Still not a great kick for goal. Hopefully that will improve over time. Ryan Marrick as well. I think we are really utilising him now in a position where he can best demonstrate his talents. He is a great kick at the footy. Again, pretty much every game he's played this year, there's been some errors, no doubt about that. But every team needs a good, reliable, offensively minded rebounding attacker, at least in my opinion. Like, it's good to have those. I don't think a back 6 or 7 is complete without that playmaker. And I think Marrick is taking strides in that area and, certainly winning more possessions than he's ever. There's a couple of games where he's gotten in the mid-20s, which is good. Tyrell Dewar did some good things. Horrible turnover in the second quarter or something like that. Just terrible. But nonetheless, still an absolute lock for this 23, I would have thought, going forward, at least over the next few weeks. Ruben Ginby's kind of a player that we just accept is kind of, reliably good now. But it is really pleasing to see him in career best form. And there's a chance he's winning our best and fairest at the moment. Like, from the top of my head, I think all 4 have been good, solid performances from Ruben Ginby. And I'm very glad we have him in our team. Liam Baker put in another sort of trademark performance, good and bad. Look, I'm grateful we have him. He's been playing a lot of midfield and he is winning a lot of ground balls and he is trying his guts out. but his radar's still off, and that might have been his worst performance by foot. I think he went at 50% disposal efficiency, but also won the most possessions of any Eagle. I think up there with Harley, and it might have been equal, I think. Definitely needs to tighten up on his radar, but the thing is, the standard is so low at West Coast at the moment that he's still an automatic lock for this team. And I'm actually not even implying that he shouldn't be in the team. I'm just saying that we are so bad that it's still good to have him in the team despite his skill errors. You just really hope he tightens it up soon. On the subject of Harley, that was definitely his best performance for the year. It was nice to see him play a little bit more relaxed, play a little bit more back to basics, if that makes sense. So, not necessarily trying the cutest option. I felt like he was finding his touch, providing a little bit of run, a couple of handballs. I don't think he had a big fantasy score because he was probably handballing more than he was kicking. And then as the game wore on, grew into that confidence a little bit and, did a few trademark shrug-offs and fend-offs and stuff like that, which was good. I think he really added something there. I would like to still have him as that impact midfield rotation. There was a period in that second term where the commentators were suggesting we do that because we were getting beaten in the clearances. And I would like to retain that as a rotation option. Absolutely, still give him some time in there. But it was good for him and his confidence to be able to find the footy and, played it in a much more disciplined way. Didn't do anything silly, hit his targets, provided a bit of run. We still haven't seen as much this year at all, that breakaway pace. And I do wonder if that's still, conditioning. He did miss a part of the preseason, but a step in the right direction after three, I don't want to say disappointing, but a little underwhelming performances to start the year. It's good to see Harley back in a role where he's impacting the game. We were the youngest team in the competition this week, and I suppose that makes sense. You take out Elliot Yeo and Jeremy McGovern, two of our top three players. Oh, and Jake Waterman. So our three best players, probably, to my estimation, that is. 80 points is probably about right, isn't it? But at least we saw some improvement. All the guys I talked about who have been some of our better performers, have also been very young guys. So you just hope that McGovern back in, Yeo back into that midfield. We desperately need Yeo. Jake Waterman, all three parts of the ground bolstered. Hopefully we start to see some improved results. We've got a big game against Carlton. I mean, they're all kind of big, particularly early in the season when we're still finding out exactly where we sit. I think we have a general idea we're probably going to be bottom two, but this game is still, somewhat winnable. The thing is, I remember last year when were we favourites to beat Carlton in round 21 or whatever it was, and that was a shameful day in West Coast history, to be honest with you. Nonetheless, given that Carlton are 0-4, we absolutely need to be approaching this game with some belief that we can win, and that's what we need to get. We need to have that. I don't feel like we play with a lot of belief at the moment. We're still a little bit jittery, which is completely understandable when you're getting pantsed like we were on the weekend, but I'm not sure if I'll get to do a proper preview for Carlton. Those don't seem to be super popular anyway, but I will if I get time to. But some early thoughts on changes. I heard that Jack Williams and Jack Hutchinson flew to Adelaide. No idea if that is merely to be with the team for an away trip, an extended away trip, or if that's a realistic indicator that these guys could play. We've heard that Jake is on the cusp for a few weeks now, so I won't get my hopes up. Hutchinson, that seems a little early. I'd be a little bit surprised if he's rushed back into the team, but I do rate the kid, so perhaps. We should have Liam Ryan, I would have thought. Unless he was really sick, he should be available again, and unsure about Elijah Hewitt. It was kind of implied that he was pulled out precautionarily for that game, but given his history, I'm not sure if I buy that. As for outgoing players, I would have thought Tim Kelly out. This is the week to do it, to be honest. I no longer fear what it looks like if we drop our most senior midfielder. I think not much would change. And I do suspect that Noah Long might make way this week. I mean, the sub, Hamish Davis, who I didn't mention, there's not much to say about Hamish Davis. He came on, had 5 or 6 possessions, hit all the targets, but not a lot to assess there yet. But the fact that he had more touches than Noah Long in that space of a quarter and a bit, I think the writing's on the wall for Noah. He probably will go back to the waffle, and I'll back him to come back as a better player when he does so, but he has had a pretty quiet start to the year and needs to find some touch. So yeah, all in all, to summarise my thoughts, probably some more clear positives in that game than there were against Fremantle, despite the margin. We got obliterated in that first quarter and a bit, absolutely. There is a huge gap between us and GWS. I still think there's a big gap between GWS and Fremantle, and certainly the version of Fremantle we played on that day. So all things in context, the fact that we were the youngest team in the comp and some of our younger players were our better players. In fact, off the top of my head, if you did a top 5 players on the day, with the exception of maybe Liam Baker, they'd all be 21 and under. I'm thinking Ryan Marriott comes to mind. Brady Hoff would be like 22. He was pretty good. Tom Gross was probably worth a mention, close to that top 5. Archer Reed, Jack Williams, they all had impact, whether you want to rank them in the top 5 as such. There was quite a decent list of young players who played well in this game, whereas I'm not sure if that was clearly true in the Derby. So strangely, I took something from this game. Hopefully we can galvanise and be bonded by this away trip. That does definitely have an impact on team morale and team chemistry when you spend a bit of time away together. So maybe I'm asking for too much there. It's a big game against Carlton. I really don't want us to not show up to that game, which might be a redundant statement, but Carlton is a team that slap us around, even when they're out of form and have every reason to lose. So hopefully we're in the game at halftime. If we are, for a slight chance given their second halves this year. But let me know what you thought of the Giants game, guys. What would you do with selection this week? And let me know any other things you want to discuss on this channel. But for now, up the Eagles. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.